Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Tacitus today, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. I just want to remind some viewers, I'm getting, or listeners, I'm getting a few messages saying, where's the movie, why is it a black screen? And I just want to reiterate, this is an audio live stream. So listen to this as you would the radio, while you're driving along or while you're doing stuff around the house or whatever. But treat this as like a radio broadcast, and you may find it a little bit easier with that. Now, this essay, I'd like to talk about the executive decree. Now, it's something that was rarely used outside of say, wartime, imminent threats. So we see sort of Abraham Lincoln using executive decrees in the Civil War, among the ones I don't agree with, by the way, is suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, the ability of the government to arbitrarily detain somebody without charge. I could see the reasoning at the time, but I don't think that excuses it in my view. And some of the decrees that were Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in World War II, and even some of the stuff that Woodrow Wilson did in World War I, or say some of Theodore Roosevelt's actions in some of the approaches he took in breaking up the monopolies and the boss system and things like that, which Woodrow Wilson also a little bit more on later. But just on the idea of decrees, they're rarely used, and typically there has to be an emergency for the decree to be used, the executive decree. Now, this could be the president or some other elected leader. But when we look at COVID, executive decrees were used pretty much all around the world and simultaneously. So there was an urgent desire to bypass the law, the rule of law, bypass due legal process, and bypass the democratic process. Now, this is what the globalists go into a swoon over this, because the impediments to imposing the globalist project invariably are tied up in issues surrounding the democratic process and surrounding the rule of law, due legal process, contract law, these sorts of things. And so the globalists love the idea of bypassing this. It furthers their project and the imposition of their project. It furthers their thing quite substantially. So they have a lot vested in this. Now, they can erode, as they already have, erode all of these things, democracy, rule of law, and so on. They can erode all of those things over time, but it takes time. It has to be insidious. They have to do it almost without the public knowing, and they have to keep on inventing all these excuses. We're only doing it because of the children. We're only doing it to protect women. We're only doing it to protect trans people. So they have to sort of cite some higher moral purpose, which allows them to do these things. But it's by small increments. The thing about COVID was it allows them to make as they would see it, permitted them to make a huge leap, a massive leap into arbitrary law and law by decree. Now, when as I mentioned a million times previously, I've done a lot of travel around the world and going to third world countries, or even countries that are sort of, you put them in the middle band of and they don't have the democratic processes. They don't have the rule of law. There's a lot of systems that we take for granted. The social, the wider or greater social contract that exists in the West, a lot of things we take for granted don't exist in other countries. And I was always surprised at how government edicts and laws were passed and impositions were made by decree. The president or maybe the prime minister, depending on where the country was, could just decree something to be so. And because they had this power of decree, they also had to have a heavy control of the media. So they would make a decree. The media would then run, numerous stories about how it was justified. And the experts were sort of, it's the science. The science says though, your great leader is only doing this because the science said. And that's very much the Soviet Union, by the way, was the same. And any totalitarian country where the rule of law is arbitrary, and where there isn't democratic representation, that goes pretty much down that same. And I used to, well, not so much chuckle sometimes, but it was a wry, sardonic smile would sort of spread across my face when I'd read in the newspapers or listen to their English language TV channel, say in the hotel room, something like that, where you'd hear about these decrees, and it had a real tin pot banana republic sort of flavour about it that wasn't in the West at the time. It is now, but it wasn't then. And it's amazing how quickly the West has sort of gone speeding towards banana republic type approach. Now, a banana republic is much easier to control than a homogenous society with democratic processes and the rule of law. Trying to penetrate such a country or such a place or a polity is very, very difficult if you've got that democratic process, rule of law in place. So it's very much in the globalist interest to subvert it or remove it or trash it entirely. And what we saw in COVID across the Western world was this government by decree. Now, the process was the laws already existed for this, but no one imagined it would be abused. So, in the case of an emergency, which for example could be, say, you're getting invaded and there are enemy troops running around all over the place, the government can. It's very difficult for the government to meet or for all the politicians to get together and engage in sober reflection on a particular law or a particular course of action. So the government, the state governor or the president or whoever can then has a facility to issue decrees. And this, of course, is meant to be in an emergency so dire that it's impossible for the normal functions of government to operate. That the government, the governor or the president can issue these decrees because it's expedient to do so. Now, no one ever imagined that president or that governor or whoever, prime minister, would be an employee, flunky stooge, gobbler for the globalists. No one ever imagined that situation could occur. So it was always assumed it would be a citizen very concerned about their fellow citizens, elected by the citizens, in a free and fair election. It was always assumed that scenario would exist. Of course, that's changed now. It doesn't exist. The majority of politicians all across the Western world, in fact, with only a small number of exceptions, they are employed by and are employees of and are instructed by and directed by the globalist cabal. So they don't. They don't represent the people, and they don't give a fuck about the laws and the rule of law and the democratic process. They're employees of the globalists, and the globalists are anything but democratic and supporting the rule of law and so on. So now, because I think the pandemic was effectively invented to test the theory of and can we make this work of government by decree, so to bypass all those legal and democratic processes. And I think it was far more successful than they thought it would be. And they had to control the media, they had to control the public service, they had to control the scientific establishment, they had to control the supposedly elected politicians, and so on. So I was staggered at how easy it was for this government by decree, and then to use that decree to call out the police and to actually hire specialist army anti-insurgent operatives, from the armed forces, to hire squads of them to go into the crowds and pull out any leaders or agitators or anything like that. Imagine if they did the same thing for the climate change. They could neutralise that in 5 minutes. But of course, it's only directed one way. But I watched a number of, it was caught on film. There's a certain way that army trained guys walk and stand, and the way they operate and interact, and the way orders are given and how they're followed. There's a certain sort of style and look about it. And I noticed that there was a number of military squads wearing police uniforms, pretending to be police. They weren't fucking police. That were brought in to ostensibly to be part of the police force, but in fact they weren't. They were army anti-insurgency type squads. So they're professional military guys designed to take out private citizens who've committed no crime, by the way. Now, the idea of the decree is again to respond to an emergency, but there was no emergency. So we've got a number of tiers to this. One is that the people are going to have the decree powers and the arbitrary dictatorial powers. They are also the ones that are able to declare the emergency. Now, the threshold of the emergency is itself arbitrary. I mean, the emergency could be, we've got it rained yesterday and today. Oh, it's an emergency. So any form of climate emergency, or the security force, the intelligence forces have told us that we're surrounded by white supremacist Nazis that are about to take over the universe. So we have to do a decree here for so every straight white male over the age of 18 is to be arrested and imprisoned to protect the nation, because if they go, they're going to insurrection and they're going to go after little trans black babies dressed in pink. And so they can just arbitrarily pluck an emergency out of their ass and say, look, here's the emergency, dictatorial powers, government by decree. So we've got a number of levels here. They can declare the emergency, and it can be anything, and then they can act dictatorially and bypass the electoral process and the legal process, just apply laws arbitrarily and again due legal process. Now, once they've achieved whatever objective they're trying to seek, a bit like with when you fix and rig an election, sure, later on people can come along and say, oh, look at that vote harvesting, oh, look at this, but by that stage the damage is done. It's too late. And just around the world, because of these lockdowns and a very heavy-handed police presence and security forces and so on, they are able to they just send letters of apology out to people. The government sends letters of apology, gives them a few $1,000. Okay, it's over, and everything goes on. But they've still achieved their objective of entrenching arbitrary power and by decree. So I see this as the go-to going forward. I see this will be the objective, whether they arrive at it quickly or not quite so quickly or whatever is almost beside the point now. This is the objective. This is the government, the style of government that the globalists want. And they can invent emergencies such as climate emergencies or health emergencies or threat of insurrection emergency, white supremacist emergency, Nazi emergency. They can invent any threat they want. They don't have to justify it, prove it, debate it, provide evidence, or they don't have to do any of that. They can go straight from a declared emergency straight to arbitrary government by decree. And because it's an emergency, they have sweeping powers again to bypass the democratic and the legal process. There'll be already many activist judges that are installed to hear cases and so on. So they've got, this is where they want to get to. Now, I think we need to really, really reflect on this. It's fucking dangerous. We need to really reflect on this and say, okay, if dictatorial powers are to be held, that it's for 7 days, and it's to vote for the governor or the president to have power requires a 2/3 majority to allow, of all parties, to allow that sort of power in the first place. Then they've got 7 days to use it. 30 days absolute max, but I think 7 days is enough. And during that time, they have to call Congress or the Assembly, the House of Representatives, whatever, to review the evidence and determine that it is an emergency. And again, it's not a simple majority of one, which is how a lot of these things did get over the line previously. But again, a 2/3 majority. This is very, very fucking serious, giving this sort of power to people who are employees, not of the citizens of the state, but they're employees of the fucking globalist cabal. And you hand them dictatorial powers. I mean, it's insane. But that's where they want to go, and I think that's, in my view, that's where they're going. But such powers must be severely limited and curtailed. Now, we can make exceptions, say, if enemy troops of a nation state are invading and that sort of thing, and bombs are falling and yada yada. Then that's something. But you can't. Look, I think there might be a bunch of white supremacists down around the corner there, and the FBI says they're planning an insurrection. No, that's not a fucking emergency, you moron. Because that's the sort of shit that they pull. So that's we need to really pull back from this, because in my view we're at the abyss level now on this side of thing. For example, let's suppose a candidate they don't like wins a presidential election. So then, Nazis voted for that candidate. Nazis, the Nazis are going to take over. Emergency, dictatorial powers. Everyone who voted for that candidate has to be put in prison. I mean, that would sound insanely far-fetched a few years ago. Now it's not. This sort of thing, an approximation of it, is actually real and in front of us today. So we need to really consider these things and decide to think it through very carefully. At no stage should an emergency decree be allowed to stand without debate, without sober consideration of the issues, without a 2/3 majority that have approved it. Now that's not foolproof in itself, but it is a break on the arbitrary, is a restriction, a limit on arbitrary power, because really government by decree and by artificially declared emergency is arbitrary power at its most naked. As I was doing this, or just about to sit down and do it, I noticed there was a similar one from Dinesh D'Souza on his channel, and he quite eloquently has sort of framed the same discussion, I think. So when you listen to this, it's worth going over there and having a listen to Mr. D'Souza. You've been with Tassos today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.